Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is probably one of the most fascinating guests I have had on this show. His name is David Holdridge of Westfield. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott.
I've sat here, I've talked to you. I didn't know you until you reached out to me a few days ago. But after hearing about your life, I think, wow, I've lived such a boring life. But of course, you're also a published author, which, being an author myself, I like that angle as well. But you've lived a life like many of us in the Northeast Kingdom couldn't even imagine. But first of all, who are you, and where did you begin?
Whoa. Well, it's how to condense an answer to a question like that. In my early years, I was raised in Australia. My father was involved in World War II. He was based in Australia. He married his principal nurse, who was an Australian. He had been hurt. They got married, and I was a product of that marriage and lived there till about 10 years of age. And I came back to Connecticut, went through the school systems, university, not far from here, just west of here at Union College in Schenectady, New York. Came out of that experience in 1966, and in 1967 was drafted by the United States Army, went to officers candidate school down Fort Benning, Georgia. Came out of that and was assigned within about a year to Vietnam, where I was platoon leader. Got hurt, spent some time in hospitals, and then subsequent to that, there's a few interludes of other things that I did. Joined initially Catholic Relief Services for an assignment in Beirut, Lebanon during the Civil War there. My wife accompanied me. My daughter was born during the Civil War there. And from there on, for the next 35 years, it was a succession of emergencies overseas. And my profession, my skill set, as they say, was emergency response, working to provide shelter, food, protection for vulnerables, children, old folks, etc., who are displaced by war. Son was born in North Africa. My wife worked in Lebanon at certain times. And most recently, that was the cholera epidemic in Haiti. And I've just come back from that in October 6th of last year, to resume my life on my farm in Westfield, which my wife and daughter bought 10 years ago, almost to the day.
Now tell a story. Yeah, I liked your story about how you managed to find Westfield, Vermont.
Well, it wasn't. I was in Iraq, in the middle of Iraq, in south central Iraq, in a mid-sized town called Kut. And it was my wife and daughter. We had a budget. I mean, there's only so much money in our savings accounts, and we had a budget. And we were looking at that point, we're going to retire. We're not going to always be sort of vagabonds. And I said, great. And so they just took as a starting point Connecticut, Massachusetts, and just drove north. They knew they wanted some land. That ended up being 50 acres. Water on the land. That ended up being Phillips Pond. It's about 3 acres on our property. And pasture where we could grow hardwoods. And inevitably, I'm sure there were other choices. I wasn't with them. That brought us to Westfield. And we're happy there. We're happy there. Other than the fact that sometimes we think the tax rate is a little high.
That's remarkable.
The fact is, the people that we've come to know there, well, it's a small town, as you know, Scott. It only has about 500 folks there, so, but we've been received wonderfully there.
Well, I'm going to tell you about. I used to occasionally cover town meeting day when I was with the Chronicle and in Westfield, and I used to love going to Westfield because you had the hardcore farmers, then you had the back to the landers, and then you had and it was such a melting pot. Whereas some towns, that's a combination for conflict. In Westfield, I thought everybody meshed so well.
Yeah. Well, frankly, we have not, it may be there, but we have not experienced any pushback as newcomers there. I mean, to some extent, the fact that I am a farmer, or my wife and daughter, because I was gone most of the time, granted woodlots and plantations, but nevertheless, I think that gives us some credibility. And the fact is, we are committed to the town. My wife is very involved in master's gardening and composting and these sorts of things. So we're engaged too.
Now, do you think, does everybody know, most people who live here, we've lived pretty quiet lives, and do many people know the life you have lived? Because you've been in combat zones, or at least disaster zones, ever since Vietnam, it sounds like.
That's right.
And, did your experience in Vietnam, being in war and seeing the seeing war, seeing the aftermath, did that set you on this course?
Well, it gave me an experience that was definitely transferable to working in war zones and managing humanitarian response. There are certain things that transfer quickly, and it's managing people, whether they were soldiers in my platoon or people that were working in the humanitarian enterprise in very stressful and dangerous situations. The logistics of it, different logistics for sure in Vietnam, but was still very much the whole notion with humanitarian assistance, trucking, delivering of supplies, airlifts, all these sorts of things were somewhat similar. And then knowing context. If you don't know the context as a platoon leader in Vietnam, what's going on? What are the dynamics that are going on among the national people in which you are circulating? Same in Iraq. You're going to get hurt.
Right. And do you think if you'd never gone to Vietnam, do you think you would have followed this path, or were you already on this trajectory of working with?
No, you know what I was in 1966 when I graduated from college?
What's that?
I was basically totally undecided or even bewildered about what came next. I had a piece of paper, I had a degree. I knew, like most of the people of my age, that Vietnam was in the air, 66, for sure. The Marines came there, 65, it was in the air. But no, and in that state of being bewildered about next steps, with of all things, a diploma in French literature. It's not something that makes you a lot of money. In that state, when I got drafted, I was not like some folks who bemoaned that fact. I never expressed it this way, Scott, but when I got off the train, it was the New Haven, Connecticut Induction Center.
Right.
I actually whistled from the train to the induction center. Foolishly, in retrospect, but I had purpose, and I had just been floating before then. So, as time went on, I started to be more analytic about what that purpose was. But at that particular moment, sure, I was young, I was healthy, and I had no direction in life, and I just had a piece of paper for French literature.
You had, you just came back, in the fall from Iraq. You said outside.
No, from Haiti.
Oh, from Haiti. So when did you come back from Iraq?
I came back from Iraq the last time in 2010, and then a brief hiatus at the farm with my wife, planted some trees, worked the land a bit, and then I went to Haiti in 2012, 13, 14, 15, back here on the farm, and then 2016 until October back in Haiti.
So you were in Iraq. I think you said you were even working and living outside the green zone.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, that's central.
Right.
That's central to this book, and it's central to our lives over there.
So the book is about what?
Well, I just want to follow, because your question is really, if I answer the first question, I'll answer the second. It was about how much more effective humanitarian organizations can be if they manage to negotiate with the local towns and communities to keep them safe,
Right.
without arms, without concertina wire, and without being inside a perimeter. And we were one of the perhaps the only large organization that lived like that. And of all the things that I'm proud of, sure, I'm proud that we got lots of food assistance to displaced people during the Civil War there, and shelter. I mean, all life is equally precious, and your heart would, I mean, absolutely. But other agencies were doing that well, as well. But we went through that whole period of time and being protected by local communities without any serious casualties in 7 years, which was extraordinary, and principally because the religious clerics, the Mukhtars in the various cities and towns, after about 1 year, we were protected. And that is really a lot about what this book's
Now,
about.
who were you with? Which group?
The first time I went to Iraq, because it's a long journey, and that was basically in '91, was with Catholic Relief Services, and then more recently, in 2003, I went with an organization from Portland, Oregon called Mercy Corps.
Oh, so you were there even before the war.
Yes, I was there basically with Desert Storm when, if you remember, there was a massive exodus of refugees there, principally to Jordan, and there was an intensive bombing campaign by the coalition, George Bush Sr.
Right.
coalition there, and there was an aftermath, which many of your viewers may remember, where the United States retreated expeditiously, and Saddam Hussein came into that vacuum and killed lots of folks. It was during that period that we managed to work there only for 2 years before our rules of engagement, if you will, as a humanitarian organization, that we delivered solely on the basis of need. We were not there to shore up his government, for sure. When he became too annoyed by our presence, and we were told to leave, or else. So we left.
Did you feel like you were in danger at all during those years?
These recent years?
Or
with
any?
NEK? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Every time. See, we could, for the reasons I stated, Scott, we could pretty much feel confident in our security if we stayed within the communities where the religious sheikhs were dominant, and the tribal sheikhs, because they pretty much protected us. There were certain rules that we had to obey, but once we did those, we could work our humanitarian effort. But when we had to get into a car and move to other parts of Iraq, or we'd say into the Sinai Triangle, into Diyala, into Bakuba,
Right.
into what we called the Badlands,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and my driver, Ahmed Kadir, we became very close over all these years. He used to inspect me to make sure that I was disguised sufficiently that I could be in the back of his car with a keffiyeh over my head, my sunglasses on, my eyes are blue, and drool a bit and act like an old Iraqi man. And we moved. And I'm glad to say that of the dozens and dozens of trips Ahmed and I made into the Badlands to meet religious sheikhs, to set up new programs, there was only about 3 times when our disguise, my disguise, wasn't sufficient and we got stopped. And a couple of them were dicey. Were very dicey a couple of times. But, God willing, I was spared, and the other principal lieutenants of mine, or deputies of mine in Iraq, were spared as well. But we spent an awful lot of time, don't sleep in any bed, same bed twice, make sure your car is totally blended with the cars on the road, make sure you're dressed appropriately. You go into a meeting, unexpectedly out of the car, into the meeting, have the meeting, and out. And don't take the same road back that you took going there. I mean, all these protocols that were constantly, renewed, discussed, etc.
And why, I'm sitting here listening to this life, and I'm thinking, why? Why did you do this? Why did you do this for a living?
Well, I'm told after a while, years, with Vietnam as a starting point, that I was good at it. That I could, in the Army, it was always that dynamic mission in men.
Mm-hmm.
You got a mission, say you don't want casualties if you can help them. And I was told that I was good at that, getting a mission done and not taking casualties. So I got good at it. And to some extent, Scott, the answer to your question isn't much more complicated than that. I got good at something. Secondly, as we used to say, we folks over there, that, we weren't exactly selling whiskey to the Indians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to make more of it than it deserves. But we were instrumental in saving a lot of precious lives, particularly what we called the vulnerables, the old folks, the children, and the ill, by getting assistance to them. But I don't want to confuse that at all, what we did. I got paid a salary to do this, just to be clear, with real heroics by some Americans in these war zones that spend their lifetimes there doing humanitarian assistance on a much more modest scale, yes, and many of them represent religious congregations or orders in the United States. They could be Holy Cross Sisters, they could be representatives of evangelical groups, but they come, and they come to stay. It isn't an 18-month tour, thank you, and they're back on the plane. I think one of the reasons why I was able to be of some use in Iraq is because I did spend just recently in the last tour there, 7 years. And you get to learn context. And as I said before, whether you're a platoon leader or you're over there doing, context is the whole name of it. Is knowing how you can travel in a foreign community as American and be effective against your mission goals. And these folks, some of them have been there 20, 30 years. And as I said, often just running a clinic. And those are the people, and they don't get the folks that represent congregations and religious orders here. They don't get a tax-free salary for doing that work. So there are saints over there, and we certainly weren't among them, but but it would be unfair to say that we were not responsible for saving a lot of people whose lives were miserable during that civil war in Iraq.
So, when occasionally we'll see, people like you on the news who are being held hostage and some of them eventually are killed. Did that impact, seeing that, when that happened, when you became aware of that happening, did that impact you any at all, or?
Absolutely. And again, it's the same sort of thing as a manager in Iraq, as a platoon leader, manager.
Right.
In Vietnam. And absolutely, because you got to manage your people, or guess what? You put them on a plane. And I'd say in a 1 year period of time, if in Iraq now I'm talking about, if I had 100 people, that's Americans and other nationalities, expats, come work for me, I'd say 50 of them I put on a plane, and most of those 50 within the first 24 hours. Because they couldn't get past the image of the knife going through their windpipe, through their muscles, through their vertebrae, and held up as a trophy by Al-Qaeda. They could not get through that. And yes, there were NGO workers that did. It kept you focused, or it made you worthless. And the best thing you could do, I could do, there was not much discussion. It was easy enough to see, was to make sure that that person got to the airport and on the plane. The airport was far north on the Turkish border. Got on the plane and got out, and that it was done in a way that absolutely did not humiliate that person at all. And sometimes that meant some lies. Oh, I just got this from headquarters. She's been reassigned. But absolutely, because to have a person like that in a platoon in Vietnam or in an operation in Iraq, all you're doing is putting at risk everybody else.
So, you were showing me your book here, and it has Todd will put it up on the screen, and it shows some houses, but then a satellite dish. Now, when did satellite dishes arrive in Iraq?
Okay. Under Saddam Hussein, this was in the Shia South.
Right.
This, where I worked most of the time, not all the time. Under Saddam Hussein, there were some brave souls. On most of the roofs, there's these tin or zinc reservoirs on the roof where people stored water. Now they're plastic. But back under Saddam's day, and there are a couple of very brave souls that would cut off the top of those and put a receiver in. But that meant jail or worse under Saddam. Anybody who sought access to outside information, whether it came from Dubai or from New York, their fate was pretty much sealed. Tommy Franks came in March 15th, 2003. Boy, You want to talk about an appetite. You want to talk about a nation of people who were starved to get information, images and narrative from outside their country, and principally from the United States of America. They went up like mushrooms. That's the cover on this book, and sometimes in the most seemingly unlikely places, a lot of mud and wattle hooches. And there would be a generator and a dish. And as I told you before the show when we were chatting, somebody had once asked me once in a while I'd get interviewed by representatives of American newspapers in Iraq. They'd come down to Kut and Hanakeen and Diyala, Wasat, and they'd ask me, what were the most influential, disruptive things here? And of course, Tommy Franks, there's no doubt about that. That was disruptive. It changed the balance of power in that country. Had been ruled for hundreds of years by 17% of the population, and now it was being ruled by 65% of the. Boom. And the second person, and this is where the eyes rolled, Oprah Winfrey. Because the women were home. Mm-hmm. They didn't have much freedom to move about. That very, very traditional society. And they were home, and now, with subtitles, through Dubai, to them, they were getting Oprah. She became, you could go in just about any home in South Central Iraq during certain hours, and whether they all had some sort of television, whether they were receiving her show or not, they clustered around whoever did. And absolutely, she was, we call it disruptive. And she was their first gateway to American culture that they had.
Was that women, and did it spawn any women liberation movement in the communities at all?
No, you're not going to overturn thousands of years, or let's just take a starting point for the Shia, 1,300 years of traditions, and no, Islamic traditions. You're not going to turn those over, flip them, except in some areas of Baghdad, Mosul, Basra, very urbanized, more cosmopolitan. You're not. But what it did do is it created the bed. The only time those women got together with other women was usually between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They would walk down to a little tiny grocery store about a third of the size of your studio. And if they converged at the same time, they would trade information. All sorts of information. Half a dozen. By a year and a half later, they had cell phones. And they were talking not just to those 6 women. They were talking to their relatives in Baghdad, their relatives in Basra, and in some cases, talking to the diaspora in the United States of our Iraqi Americans. I can't give you the analytics on how that changed, but all I can say is I'll leave that to a sociologist or anthropologist, but all I can say is that had to be as convulsive to their society as the mass production of automobiles was to ours in the early 20th century. It had to.
So, how? This is. I don't want to get into politics, but how? So, what impact has our decision to invade Iraq? What impact did that have on the country overall? Is it better? Is it worse? Or
Well, that's a long debate, and it is more current these days from both Republican and Democratic sides to point to the invasion as a terrible mistake, a deadly mistake. But you know, I'm not so sure in my own mind that when history is written 20, 30 years from now, it's going to be seen quite so unequivocally. I think there's a lot more nuance to changing the power dynamics in a country which had favored a minority. Can you imagine the United States if only 17% of our whole country ruled everything? And I'm not talking class, I'm talking ethnicity.
Right.
Can you imagine? And that got turned on its head to majority rule. And of course, you don't do those things convulse the country. You don't overturn 1,300 years of history with a lot of bloodshed. So it's a harder. I'm not so quick as many of the pundits on that thing. Now, what I will say, and where we probably do agree with many of the pundits on this issue, is that post 2003, our occupation of Iraq
Right.
was managed about as badly as you can imagine. I mean, think Banana Republic level of management. What came out of that green zone from Bremer on? It just make your head spin. And you know, I used to roll my eyes and look up at the heavens. I used to say, and you know, America is renowned, supposedly, for its management skills. We are supposed to be the ultimate managers. And my Lord, just basically the way policy got, the euphemism was refreshed by the green zone, sometimes every 2 to 3 months. We're going to set up an alternative government, coalition provision authority. No, we're going to tear it down. We're going to have elections now. No, we're going to have elections later. And then the way they spent, Scott, billions now, with a B, billions of dollars made available under supplemental legislation for Iraq to just, we call it bricks and mortars, just to construct things like schools everywhere without any consideration. Were there any teachers available for these schools? Were there any teachers that were going to get paid to work in these schools? Was there any water available for the bathroom in these schools? Were there any textbooks in these schools? Was there any planning by the town of where the schools would be and where they wouldn't be? No. Just go in there, throw money at it. And at one time in 2003, into the beginning of 2004, literally the green zone, that's Department of Defense to a large extent, and state USAID, we're delivering paper bags, big paper bags full of cash to NGOs to basically just build stuff, bricks and mortar. Whenever possible, my group there, we avoided that. Because we knew all it was doing was enriching contractors, local contractors, and that it had no rhyme nor reason if you couldn't have teachers make education, not bricks and mortar. And we focused as much as possible on where we saw local demand. And that was for literacy, Arab literacy, so that they could read Arabic. Tremendous demand. It was to teach them the new technologies. Where there was demand, we did everything we could. And a lot of times, to tell you the truth, we snuck those interventions in between budget lines for bricks and mortar because U.S. government financed efforts did not allow for anything that responded to immediate demand other than the contractors who made a pile of money off building schools.
But that's funny. It doesn't surprise me because I even look at this country. With the federal government or some degree state government, they throw a lot of money towards bricks and mortar because I think either knowingly or unknowingly, it's a way of making the appearance that they're actually doing something. The appearance of that they're doing something, because it's actually harder to actually do something.
I can tell you, in the schools that we built, and we built a lot, in the schools that we built, I would say on average, within 2 months, the bathrooms were dysfunctional. Because there was no budget for maintenance, there was no budget for water to be brought and pumped up to the reservoirs on the roof. We had basically new schools 2 months in, and the classes, no water in. No water to even drink for the kids. And it gets hot down there, 45 degrees centigrade, so that's hot. Going out of the school to relieve themselves. So, I mean, these were, and you're right, these were monuments to American largesse, which in the end, what was the outcome, as we say? That's an output. We got a school. What was the outcome? Hostility from the majority of the people in the community because they knew that the contractors had made unreasonable profits from doing these with U.S. government monies at the expense of interventions that could have benefited the majority of people in the community.
So since you've been to Iraq before and after, during the war, I don't know about after, 'cause I guess it still goes on, but before and during the war, has the attitude towards Americans changed that much from the average person on the ground, as in the average Iraqi?
It really depends now. If you talk to the majority population, let's start at the top. There's about 14%, these percentages are hard to get by. They don't exactly do a scientific census. But the Kurds,
right,
in the northeast, much in the news these days, I'm generalizing, so some of your viewers or readers can come back and say, oh, that wasn't right, but I'm general. The Kurds generally, it's still a place in Iraq where teenage kids will go around with T-shirts that say, I love America. Mm-hmm. Unabashedly. So, Kurds, and that's 13% of the country, 14. Mm-hmm. Shias, about 65%, principally from Baghdad south to Basra. Yeah, there is a more mixed sense. You have among the Shias a certain zealotry. Remember, they're Shias. Iranians are Shias. Right. But Iranians are Persians. Shias in Iraq are Arab. So it gets complex. But there's a long historic relationship between Iran and the Shia population. And there are those groups among the Shia that have been sponsored by Iran and have historical ties to Iran, including some of the religious clerics, that want America out. America and American culture out. And that's because, our historical issues with Iran, back to the 79, okay? But there's also a proportionately large middle class or educated Shias that absolutely, you ask them privately as a friend where they'd like to go, where they'd like to live, there's no hesitation. America. Absolutely. Because why? Because they love their children just as much as we love ours. And they don't see an end to the type of turmoil and convulsion in the near future. And they want a place where their children can go to bed safe.
You know, we talk about turmoil now, but what was life like for those same people before the invasion? Was it pretty good, or?
No, it was horrific. It was horrific. Halabja in the Kurdish area, where Saddam gassed whole communities. Shia, after Desert Storm, when the Bush administration, the coalition, Bush Sr. and the coalition retreated south, it was horrific. It was absolutely horrific. And who do you think during their war with Iran, Saddam had on all the front lines? Cannon fodder. Shia. Poor Shia. No. When the news was announced that he had been captured, the Shia majority erupted in unprecedented joy.
Were you in?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
See, I don't think we as I actually have a number of friends who are from countries, or I have had a number of co-workers, friends who've lived in countries like where where they grew up in, like Iran, one,
Right.
And then Pakistan, and they said Americans don't understand. Americans don't understand how, in many ways, America's poor are actually pretty rich compared to what they came from, and there's such a cultural difference. They were saying.
You know what the attraction is, so-called the city on the hill, from the origins from the Mayflower onwards.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said, we Americans, whether you were humanitarian workers or soldiers, we are the purveyors, willy-nilly, of America's values and interest. And you know the value that resonates far more than any others? It's not the pictures of wealth. It's not the poor washerwoman in some house that catches a glimpse on the television in the 2006, 7, 8 from Dubai of Baywatch. It's not that. It is the principal value, and they hear it from their diaspora back in the United States. You can come here poor, and if you want to live like a church mouse and work, excuse the language, work your ass off, your kids can go to college. And it's true enough. It's not true always, but it's true enough with the Haitian Americans. It's true enough with the Vietnamese Americans. It was definitely true with Irish Americans, German Americans, Italian Americans. And that is the value. And that is why the recent debate about borders and immigration has a tremendous resonance, whether they're Iraqis or Haitians or Vietnamese, overseas, wherever, of people in very troubled circumstances. Because, and America's immigration policy has been a roller coaster. It's definitely not what we're experiencing today. This current debate is definitely not something new to America. But the fact of the matter is, for many of those people, that's the value. That's the value that they love most about the United States. And because I guarantee you, if you're not born into an elite in Haiti, if you're not born into an elite in Iraq. Your children aren't going to be any better. Your grandchildren aren't going to be any better. And I'm not saying it's a smooth ride for people who come here. Absolutely not. But there's enough possibility to keep hope alive. There's no hope in those countries.
Oh, I could sit down with you for hours because I that's what I tell people is no matter how, I think we do still, this country, we can sit there and we can have all these political battles, but still, I tell people before we came on, I was telling one of the workers here, I said, I'm living proof that you can, that anybody can make it. And I, it's half joking, half serious. I said, if I've made it, anybody can. And I think sometimes while the people over there are learning that this is the, in a bit of the promised land, I think now we as Americans are being told, oh no, you can't make it. You need government to do it all for you. And I think some people are losing their drive to get ahead because I find the government tells us, no, you need us. And,
Well, look, it's a major theme in my book. It's got a major theme. And, you can't be in my line of work for 40 years without having made an abundance of friends within the United States government, whether they were soldiers or civil servants overseas. But absolutely, unequivocally, our wealth in this country is our civil society. It is not our government. It is our civil society. And the extent to which it seems an ever-growing federal government and outreach serve to diminish the vibrancy of our civil society, I think we are whittling away America's greatest asset. It's our richest asset. And I'm talking about everything from granges to churches to colleges to rights groups to farmers clubs. I'm talking all of it. It is the richest mosaic of citizen organizations in the world. And it's made us great. And the government has to be very, very careful about what it does, in my opinion. And this goes for our work overseas. There is no way those values and interests that I talked to you about that we are supposed to be bringing with our work, whether it's our soldiering or our humanitarian assistance, there is no way that government employees overseas in the green zone or other fortresses, because that's what they are nowadays, can convey those values as well as American civil society. Absolutely not. And so, yeah, I agree with you. That sounds a bit like a political statement, a partisan statement. But, I mean, that's been my experience. I'm 72 years old. I've been doing this business overseas since I was 23 in Vietnam, 22. And I'm telling you, our government, I'm not even, the expression, should not be doing for us what we can do for ourselves. And that means there are a lot of things in this country that we need the government for. Right. But there's also a lot of things we should be doing for ourselves.
Right, yeah, because I have this saying, some of the people who claim they want to help us the most in government or politics, I think they're doing the most to oppress us, is by doing too much. And I'm all for help. But the thing is like, I hate to say it, I served in the Vermont House at one time, and I think there's still a lot of dignity in state legislators, but I have long ago lost any use for national politics, as in, like, most people do and say what they want to get elected, and then they're going to do whatever they see fit. Okay, how can somebody, now the name of your book is How do you say?
It's avant-garde of Western Civ. And what that means is basically no matter how you dress it up,
Right.
whether they're people who are working for me in Iraq or Haiti, whether they're Americans or Canadians, because we mixed, or French or Brits, they're part of Western Civ. And avant-garde is we are the first representatives of that often come into a foreign country
Right.
and are the people that carry with us that Western culture. So that's who we are. We're the avant-garde of Western Civ, and it's on Amazon, or through my name, or
Do you have a website?
yes, I do.
And so I'm going to have the producer put the website on, and then you can explain where they can find when they go to your website.
Sure. Well, the website, which was created by my daughter, who lives in Westfield on my farm, basically, when you go onto it, it has the various rubrics, categories, homepage, about, press, contact, and in the middle, it says avant-garde.
Right.
Click on that, and it will give you all the links to where you can buy my book.
Right. What, in a nutshell, I know we spoke about your career and everything, but in a nutshell, what will readers get out of this?
I hope what they'll get out of this is to get a sense of, here's the thing, to the extent, this isn't an option, this isn't a choice for American citizenry, whether we're going to be global or national. That is not a choice. From the plates we eat off, the forks we use, the financing that we get, on and on and on, we are global. There's absolutely no doubt whether we want to be or not. And the fact of the matter is, with the new technologies, we can get citizens here directly connected to people overseas who are in desperate or depressed circumstances and create a dialogue and a friendship. This used to be something we did in this country, church to church, college to college. We did that. Now instead, we send money to big charity. We have no contact, and we get, maybe, depending on how much we give, we get a little success story back. And why is this so important? Is because to the extent America doesn't understand the world around us, we're going to get politicians that can manipulate us into wars where we're not informed enough to say no or to say yes with conditions. And that could be Vietnam, that could be Iraq, Syria, you name it. But it is in our vital interest that a much greater percentage of Americans understand we are still the hegemon in this world. We have an unparalleled military and economic and economy to back that power. But the use of that power has to be informed in this country by our representatives in Washington based on an informed citizenry. And now, for the first time, Americans, through the new technology, very affordable, have that opportunity to become more informed and take back decisions, take back charge of decisions about how we are going to relate to whether it's North Korea, Syria, Rwanda, Nigeria, you name it, and start to be an influence on those decisions. Or guess what? Whether you thought it was a good idea or not a good idea, you are going to find yourself, America, right back in the throes of the anguish we suffer today about Vietnam, about Iraq, the same questions you're asked. So that is perhaps the principal thing is we've got to be more citizens of the world, and that is not a partisan position. That is a reality for all of us here already.
You know, now, come back to the Northeast Kingdom. I think you settled in a pretty good place. We have our faults. But I still think if the world, like people like to say we're behind times, no, I actually think we're leading the way to where it should be. I have a saying, of those of us in the Northeast Kingdom, is we like to play together, we like to work together, occasionally like to fight together. But when push comes to shove, we're typically here for each other. And I still think there's a sense of community in here. So.
Well, that's been our experience in Westfield. Absolutely. Principally, in the first instance, among the people on our street. Absolutely. We have an emergency because we got 2-foot dump of snow on us, or you name it. Our neighbors, they're not that close, maybe 500-600 yards, right. Driveways closest, but yes, they help. And we try to offer our help. We have less to offer.
Does everybody know the life you have lived?
Our immediate neighbors.
Right. So I bet you some people are going to be surprised, because when I started off by saying that you're one of the most, I've had a lot of guests. I've had everybody on here. I've had lawmen. I've had recovering heroin users. I've had about every social topic, everything there is. But especially as far as authors, and human beings, you've lived one of the most interesting careers. And as I was telling you before the show, I really wished Helena Hicks hadn't just passed away in recent weeks, in her 90s, because she lived a bit of a different life than you. She worked for the Red Cross in FEMA, and she went to every state in the Union for natural disasters. She didn't go into the war zones, but she also was a bit of a manager, not at your level. But I have a feeling you would have shared a lot of stories. Yeah. And yes, she just passed away within the last month, and she was a spark plug of a woman, and I just know the two of you would have been able to sit down for hours on end. So, okay, again, the name of your book is?
The Avant-Garde, Avantgird, of Western Civilization. And we'll give you the link.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm very happy. The bottom line here, my family and I are very happy to have ended our life's journey. We haven't ended it yet in Westfield. And we can't wait for about 3 more weeks when planting season begins for the black walnuts. And so we're very happy to be here, and very grateful to you, Scott, for giving me this opportunity to talk a little bit about my book.
I am going to reach out to my media friends, because I think your story needs to be told in press. And as we were talking, one of my gods who taught me everything I know, Tina Starr, one of the owners of the Chronicle, is a Westfield native whose father is Eves Daigle.
Whom I know.
And I will be putting an email into her today saying, you've got to talk to this guy. Hey, great work. You've lived an amazing life. And, thank you for all you've done, basically, for humankind. And thanks for coming on.
Thanks, friend.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.